Our reading today is Astonishing Immobility by Lulu Miller. This service was inspired by the spring issue of Orion magazine titled Queerest Planet, a celebration of biodiversity. The guest editor for the issue is the science journalist and author Lulu Miller, and our reading this morning is her editor's note for that issue. Early summer, 1833. Germany. Beneath nearly a full moon, two lovers meet in a dark forest and embrace so tightly it cracks the ceiling of our reality, causing a fork in the multiverse. In the other universe, justice arrives 100 years earlier. In ours, the chain of events goes like this. A glint of moonlight or a musk, who knows, draws two male beetles to one another, and they begin to mate. A school teacher roaming the wood that night, why, who knows, discovers them. He tries to pry them apart, to literally pull the penetrating from the penetrated, but they cling to each other so steadfastly he cannot. Such immobility, a scientist would later remark, is astonishing for such a lively creature. The school teacher shows this tiny mating pair around to scientists who publish on the case at once. It is a shock, a puzzle. Homosexuality was said to be absent from the natural world, but on the heels of that first sighting, entomologists begin seeing male beetles mating with one another all over Europe. In the bushes and the lemon fields, under full moons and crescent moons, and in one case of interspecies lust, a red soldier beetle is discovered thrusting into a firefly. Twinkle, twinkle. Each tryst is explained away as an outlier, a case of mistaken identity, an act of aggression, or desperation, perhaps spurred by the lack of females. But by 1900, so many cases have piled up that the curator of Berlin's Natural History Museum, Ferdinand Karsch, gets curious. He combs through the details of each paper and finds that often female beetles are nearby during these couplings, so that rules out the desperation theory. That often the smaller beetle mounts the bigger one, ruling out the domination theory. And finally, Karsch puts forth a dangerous, blasphemous hypothesis that the male beetles are having sex with one another, not by mistake or necessity, but by preference of choice. So down the rabbit hole, Karsch falls. He finds a gay rabbit. And a toad, and a butterfly, and a whole flock of rams. He digs through the zoological literature all the way back to ancient Greeks and finds such an immense widespreading of homosexuality in the animal world, from the literal birds and the bees to canines and primates and more, that he declares it a natural disposition. The menagerie is scooped up by Germany's burgeoning gay liberation movement, published as the first known compilation of queer animals, and brandished as a technicolor refutation to the idea that homosexuality is a crime against nature. Justice through science is their war cry. And they attract so much public support, including Albert Einstein and Thomas Mann, that by 1929, a German judiciary committee votes to end the ban on gay sex. But before the vote can turn into law, the Nazis take over. And we know the rest. But I can see flickers of that other universe. The one where the law is implemented and the ban is lifted, where the gays dance on the graves of the bigots and not the other way around. And I've done enough reporting on physics to believe it's there, that alternate reality. The one where liberation arrived a century ago. The children of that world are fantastic. They wear purple boas and invent new musical instruments and negotiate ceasefires moments after triggers are pulled.
Y'all, this planet is so wondrous. This planet is so sexy. This planet is so weird. Y'all, this planet is so fluid and changing and overlapping and squelching together and vastly varied and bursting with color and gray at every meeting, blurring place. It is giving bisexual bonobos, lesbian seagulls, gay penguins, aphids, trans ginkgo trees, intersex fish, poly ducks. It is giving pregnant seahorse dads and penis-wielding female hyenas in matriarchal packs. It is giving total metamorphosis, fungi with 1,000 genders, life with 1 trillion variations. It's giving so much kink. Y'all. Earth is the queerest planet of all the planets we know. Teeming with unrestrained life, bursting with color and light, refusing categories, negotiating boundaries, generating possibilities at all the edges and overlaps. And I know the scientists told you there were taxonomies and hierarchies, and the mathematicians told you there was a norm. And I know some preacher might have told you male and female, he created them for dominion and control. And I know some economists told you competition is the bottom line, but the earth wasn't listening. The earth keeps busting through every category and law that humans seek to impose. Amid the brutal claims of power-hungry humans about what is and isn't natural, claims used to oppress LGBTQ folks, indigenous folks, disabled folks, fat folks, and folks of color, amid those claims of what is natural, nature itself continues to be flamboyantly multiple and varied and ever-changing, insatiable in its pursuit of pleasure and connection, and unrestrained in its joy. The evolutionary biologist J.B. Haldane has said the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, it is queerer than we can suppose. We cannot even begin to imagine what is unfolding between those 1,000-gendered fungi. We cannot conceive of the oceanic orgies happening in the dark, dark deep. That difference, that wildness, that emergent complexity of the life forms and landforms of the earth, they vastly outpace our comprehension. They are boundless and mysterious and slippery. The thing we do know is that we see those characteristics reflected in us and all our human fluidity and multiplicity. What we do know is that we need those characteristics to survive. We need this much difference, this much complexity, and this much persistent change to sustain life on Earth. Out of that deep and beautiful need, perhaps we even more powerfully find ourselves loving, desiring, and caring tenderly for what evades our grasp in the depths of the Earth's diversity. Perhaps uncomprehending and passionate love for what is inscrutable and in between and beyond is the paradoxical, perhaps the queer truth of what it means to be a creature on this exuberantly crowded planet. And perhaps penning a thing down is the opposite of loving it. And perhaps we can love this earth more fully if we can love it more queerly, which is to say, more strangely, more fluidly, more variously and collectively, more outside the norms of empire, more freely, more curiously, more openly. In the early 20th century, the gay liberation movement in Germany proclaimed the inherent queerness of the animal and plant world as a support for their liberation work. This planet has always supported queer liberation, has always proliferated queer life. And perhaps today, the reverse is also true, that the wisdom of queer living and queer communities can also support human care for this, our earthly home, a fitting reciprocity for lovers and our earth. In 2017, the artist Lee Pinvick gathered collaborators to create an Institute for Queer Ecology, which they describe as an environmental organism devoted to applying queer, feminist, and decolonial theory to a material exploration of our relationship to the earth. In their manifesto statement, the collective proclaims queer communities are uniquely positioned to lead on climate adaptation through embodied strategies already inherent in or familiar to queer experiences. Queerness and ecology together make visible the interconnected, entangled conditions of life on Earth and honor the strange multi-species amalgamation we live in community with. They observe that at the scale of the individual, the organism, queerness means mutability. It is the power of transformation, of shape-shifting fluency and the freedom to move from form to form. It is code switching, mimicry, flamboyance, and delight. It is subtlety, grace, and the embrace of fluidity. It plays in contrast to rigidity, permanence, and stasis, to only one way of being. Queerness is a metamorphosis, they write, and a constant becoming. They also share at the stage of the collective, the ecosystem, queerness means mutualism. It is symbiotic, in contact, relational. It is a space of eccentric economies and mutual support, of found families and utopian dreams, of care and connection, and the net benefits species gift to one another. Queerness is a world shaped by cooperation. Finally, they propose on a rapidly changing planet, queer mutability and mutualism can guide us toward adaptation and survival. So what would it look like to queer our care for the earth, to live into more mutability and more mutualism with this planet and its creatures and each other? There will be no 10-step plan. It will be a thing to feel into, a thing to emerge, a thing to co-create in relationship and with intention. But here are a few wonderings. Could queering our care for the earth look like awe? Like the awe of a lover discovering every inch of their lover's flesh, and awe and a radical presence to what is emerging, not forcing the earth into our own conceptions of binary categories like good or bad, healthy or sick, alive or dead, natural or unnatural, but celebrating what is as worthy of our worship. After all, the earth already rejects all those binaries in its refulgence, and our attempts to hold the categories apart are the harm of empire. A queerer way invites us to sink into the places where things blur together. Human, animal, wild, or despoiled, to go to the non-binary places and admire what is emerging there. The fungi consuming nuclear waste where resilient new life meets radioactive destruction. The marshlands where seawater meets fresh water and creates something both and neither. Maybe we stop mowing our lawns a while and see what grows, like really attend closely to what grows, to what emerges where grass meets so-called weed, where slow growing meets invasive, to notice what thrives in reciprocity with the thriving of others, and then to gently tend and encourage those blurring places of mutual thriving. Gently tending because our radical presence to becoming also cannot be complacency. When we begin to more deeply allow unfolding, that doesn't mean we remove ourselves from relationship. Rather, we take a listening stance that is responsive to what is unfolding, as responsive as a generous lover. A listening stance that is queerly curious about the Earth's resilient and non-binary becoming, that is ready to nurture any thriving we witness, ready to nurture any and all thriving. Because queering care of the Earth will also mean radically expanding our understanding of mutualism, growing our relational capacities beyond limiting definitions of family and ownership and possession toward a more promiscuous understanding of care, a more decadent understanding of care, ungoverned, unrestrained, unapologetic in its desire for more thriving, more liberation, more strange wildness, and more love outside the limits that empire seeks to impose. Perhaps this will look like a deeper investment in mutual aid. Perhaps it will look like right-sized alternate economies. And perhaps those alternate economies will model themselves on the carefully negotiated agreements of the consensually playful or poly. Perhaps it will look like sharing resources in a way that is not respectable according to the norms of empire and capital, but that is deeply in touch with our shared neediness. In the depths of an enforced capitalist individualism, could it be our community kink to let slip how much we need each other? I have a fantasy, y'all. That this congregation could be a place of flourishing, category-defying, queer love for our planet, for our communities, and for one another, even and especially in our broad diversity of sexual and gender identities. I'm fantasizing that we would choose together in our beautiful array of being to devote ourselves to a political and theological grounding in that Institute for Queer Equality's values of mutability and mutualism. That we could delight together in the unfolding and the in-between, resisting every invitation to category and control, staying deeply interconnected, tangled up in each other like legs in a sheet. I'm fantasizing that we could survive and adapt with a riotously queer Earth by living more relationally, more beautifully, more sensually, and more deeply committed to the mutual thriving of every life. Let's make it so.